After the Velvet. Article by Nurses Kapalyan, published on December 27, 2024 on EVN Report. The art of revolting has always been a poetic phenomenon for the Armenian soul, and not an act of brutality coded in philosophical sophistication and grand ideational postulates. Armenians have revolted because they have had no other alternatives. It has always been a practical response to oppression and not some pseudo-metaphysical adoration of lofty ideals. Armenians are conditioned to revolt, precisely because they have been conditioned to be subjugated. And so we have developed a political culture, driven by extant negation. But these acts of revolting have always been a response to external impositions, to the subjugation of Armenians as peripheral objects reduced to the interests of imperial ethos. The art of revolting, for the political Armenian, was always an act of negating the external against that non-Armenian other seeking to establish peonage. But what of revolting against one's own, not against an external actor, or against the oppression of empires, or the injustices of foreign powers, but rather revolting against the oppression imposed by those Armenians entrusted to exercise sovereignty? This was a new form of revolting. It was a velveteen act that sought to destroy the chains of repression without engaging in the act of destructing, an intrinsic part of all revolutions. This was a revolution without another. It was a revolution against acts, not peoples. It was a revolution of self-negation because it was a rare historical act of self-correction. The Armenian people peacefully rose and demanded the peaceful abdication of sovereignty from an oppressive leadership. The Velvet Revolution was practical and poetic, but it was neither grand nor ideationally sophisticated. It was a collective act of sovereignty by a people against the unilateral abuse of power. But what now? After half a decade, a war lost, a people ethnically cleansed, yet a society forging ahead, what now? To borrow from Merleau-Ponty, revolutions are true as movements and false as regimes. Indeed, revolutions are negative responses to the intolerable state of political or economic conditions, and as such, revolutions function only negatively. Revolting is an act of negation. Revolutions draw their power and strength from a denial of the existing conditions, but the most important question comes after the dust has settled. Can post-revolutionary governments establish a positive form of life without relying on the principle of negation, which was the very oxygen that made the revolution happen? In basic comparative terms, the Soviet or even the French revolutions both turned totalitarian for primarily clinging to the ethos of negation. Without something to negate, the revolution becomes a cause unto itself and thus turns absolute. The very nature of revolution, for this reason, is to believe itself absolute and not to be absolute precisely because it believes itself to be so. Did the post-Velvet system fall into the trap of clinging to some utopian image of paradise, or did it seek the practical, a conflicting process of multiplicity and plurality seeking democratic self-deliberation, even if it was a confusing and chaotic one? In essence, what distinguishes the Velvet Revolution as an act of negative revolt was that it was not based, developed, or structured on some theory of action. It was untheorizable. It was a spontaneous act of negation, but not of the other, or of the foreigner, or the external oppressor, but rather one that sought an open future and not a closed utopia. The Velvet was pragmatic, not ideational. In the 5 years since the Velvet has consolidated, there is no going back. But that is not the same as presuming that clinging to negation will translate into quality governance and a stronger society. Negation is for revolting, not governing. Thus, the Velvet being true as movement cannot become false as regime. Armenia has gone through 2 cycles of free and fair democratic elections, with a third one nearing in 2026. The 2018 elections consolidated the pragmatic values of the Velvet. The 2021 elections consolidated the politics of negation inherent to the Velvet. The 2026 elections cannot do either. The politics of negation, that of negating the previous regime, the Nachkinder, can no longer be the mantle of electoral prowess going forward, while relying on the dividends of the revolution can only become an act of believing itself to be absolute. The Velvet won, this is unequivocal. But now that the dust has settled, the dust of war, discord, and social fracture, the legacy of the Velvet is at stake. The Velvet did what it was supposed to do, but has Armenia done what it is supposed to do since? 2026 will no longer be about the Velvet, the Nachkinder, or the politics of negation. If it is made as such, the soul of the revolution will soon turn against itself, for unless the commitment to concrete progress, development, and growth are demonstrated, the ontology of the revolution will lose its credibility. Armenia is not what it was in 2018, 2022, or 2023. It is more wealthier, socially complex, diplomatically vigorous, culturally strong, and collectively resilient. Is it where it needs to be? Not even close. Has it leaped forward amidst an impossible security and geopolitical environment? It most definitely has. But two important matters still absorb the collective consciousness of Armenian society: fragility and uncertainty. For the sake of the velvet, and not in spite of it, 2026 can only be about addressing Armenia's problems and advancing its solutions. It cannot be about negation of the past, but rather what the velvet promised: embracing an open future. The more we mitigate uncertainty, the less fragile our collective sense of being. The velvet will be 8 years old in 2026, a new generation, having reached adulthood after the revolution, wait to continue the mantle, but on their terms.